her violent end, the fact that she's thrown off of the tower by the eunuchs that are her helpers, essentially the people that she was, her bodyguards, her helpers, her assistants. They throw her down at the insistence of King Jehu, who's the coup leader, the guy who's going to be king. And they threw her down, and the horses trample her, and there's nothing left. And this is exactly what Eliyahu Hanavi had said years ago, that the dog shall devour the flesh of Jezebel. And it says there was nothing left of her. And she is, she is buried, because Jehu says, you got to attend to that woman. She is a king's daughter, by the way. And her father was the king of Phoenicia. So she was a princess in her own right. And so there's not much left to bury. Interestingly, this is not the most violent thing we're going to read today. So let's take a look. It's like from one extreme violent scene to another today. But for people who wonder whether this really happened, I can only tell you this. I'm pretty sure it really happened. And while we don't have all the evidence for these things, we do have two accounts. We have the account here in Kings, and we have an account in Chronicles, which we haven't looked at yet so far, really. We may look at one little section from Chronicles today, which, if we get to it, which kind of sheds some light on the story. But I don't believe anyone would make this up. It's too horrific, and it doesn't serve any purpose other than to basically tell people, bad things were happening. It's not like the kind of mythic thing that people would invent to teach anything, even a lesson of what you shouldn't do. I don't know what to say, but let's read about what happens here when King Jehu takes power. So here's what happens. Rosemary.
Okay. Ahab had 70 descendants in Samaria. Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the elders and officials of Jezreel, and to the guardians of the children of Ahab, as follows. Now, when this letter reaches you, since your master's sons are with you, and you also have chariots and horses, and a fortified city and weapons, select the best and the most suitable of your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house. But they were overcome by fear, for they thought, if the two kings could not stand up to him, how can we?
So Jehu basically tells these people in Samaria, hey, you've got Ahab's family. Pick out which one of these guys you want to be king, right? Now, it seems like he's telling them, make a king. This is actually a threat. This is a threat because he just killed some of Ahab's family, right? He killed the king. He killed actually not only King Joram, he killed King Ahaziah from Judah, and he killed Jezebel. So he killed the king and queen. And now he's basically saying, any other family of Ahab, pick out which one you want to rule. Let him rule. Right? So it's more of a challenge, a threat. And it does exactly what it accomplishes, exactly the goal that he wants.
The steward of the palace and the governor of the city and the elders and the guardians sent this message to Jehu. We are your subjects, and we shall do whatever you tell us to. We shall not proclaim anyone king. Do whatever you like. He wrote them a second time. If you are on my side and are ready to obey me, take the heads of the attendants of your master's sons and come to me in Jezreel tomorrow at this time. Now the princes, 70 in number, were with the notables of the town who were rearing them. But when the letter reached them, they took the princes and slaughtered all 70 of them. They put their heads in baskets and sent them to him in Jezreel.
Right. So he was up, Jehu was up in Jezreel, which is where Jezebel was, where he kind of took power. And he basically says to these people that are back at the capital in Samaria, okay, if that's the case, then get rid of those rest of the family. And he says specifically, I want to see their heads and not attached to their bodies. I want to just see their heads. I mean, this is insane because he basically says, look, you pick. You either want me as king or you want someone from Ahab's family, the Omrid dynasty. If you want me as king, I want to see those heads. And that's what happens. So he's not in Samaria yet. He's not in the capital. He's in this other regional capital, this other palace that's in Jezreel, in the valley of Jezreel, which is a little closer to Haifa. So Samaria is a little closer to Jerusalem in the center. This is a little further north, but it's not terribly far away, but that's why it's being conveyed back and forth with messages. So here's what happens.
A messenger came and reported to him, they have brought the heads of the princes. He said, pile them up in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate before morning. In the morning, he went out and stood there, and he said to all the people, are you blameless? True, I conspired against my master and killed him. But who struck down all of these? Know then that nothing that the Lord has spoken concerning the house of Ahab shall remain unfulfilled, for the Lord has done what he announced through his servant Elijah.
So Jehu, who was a commander of Ahab's troops, he's not a member of Ahab's family. He's from a different group, but he had a level of authority and he led this coup. But we know that he's been given permission to do this. He's been told to do it by Elijah. And so Elijah had also said that, this horrible family of Ahab would be destroyed. Elijah also had to make this other king, Hazael in Aram. But for our story here so far, the main purpose right here is that Elijah has said, look, this is what's going to happen. But what Jehu just did was really brilliant, because he didn't kill the guys himself. He made the leaders of Samaria do it. And he basically said, yeah, I led this revolt, but you were part of this now. Your hands are bloody. And again, we're fulfilling the prophecy. We didn't do this just because we wanted to do it, because we didn't like Ahab and his family, but you're all now part of this too. So don't turn to me and go, this guy's a plotter. This guy killed all of Ahab's family. You've killed Ahab's family now. So it's a very clever strategy that he employs to kind of get everybody involved in his coup. So that's what Jehu just did. He had 70 people killed. Seems like some of them might have been fairly young men. And that's what he just did.
And Jehu struck down all that were left of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, all his notables, intimates, and priests, till he left him no survivor.
Okay, so here it says that Jehu also killed the people in Jezreel who are, it says from the house of Ahab. We assume here, again, that there were people still in Jezreel who were part of Ahab's entourage, if you will. Not necessarily, again, these aren't families, but these are, these are courtiers. These are people who are his nobles. They're the people that he entrusts with power. And it even says some of his priests. Now, again, these priests might have been worshiping Baal, which seemed to make sense based on Ahab and especially what Jezebel was doing. But he wiped out all the people that were connected to Ahab, not just the relatives, the other people that were part of his inner circle in Jezreel. Okay, so he's in Jezreel. Now he's making his way to Samaria. But as he's coming to Samaria, the purge continues.
He then set out for Samaria. On the way, when he was at Beth Eked of the shepherds, Jehu came upon the kinsmen of King Ahaziah of Judah. Who are you? He asked. They replied, we are the kinsmen of Ahaziah, and we have come to pay our respects to the sons of the king and the sons of the queen mother.
Oh, well, not good news for these people. You'll see in a second why. So he's coming down to Samaria. He's going to the south, and while he's on the journey at a place called Beth Eked, he runs into some of King Ahaziah's family. And again, King Ahaziah is the king of Judah, but he's also connected to the northern kingdom of Israel because Ahaziah's mother, Athaliah, is one of Jezebel and Ahab's children. She's the daughter of these wicked kings. And as we're about to see, she's quite a piece of work in her own right. So these are people that are related to the northern Israelites, the northern kingdom, and also related to Judah. So they're related to both. And they're here to pay respects to Queen Jezebel and the family that was in Jezreel. They didn't get the memo that those people are no longer alive, that the guy that they just ran into killed all of them. So it doesn't take much to figure out what's about to happen to these people.
Take them alive, he said. They took them alive and then slaughtered them at the pit of Beth Eked, 42 of them. He did not spare a single one.
Yeah, so that's truly being at the wrong place at the wrong time. These are people that are from Judah. And again, you could say part of the family, but they're also from the kingdom of Judah. So you could also say that to some extent, Jehu is provoking or acting in a way that could start another civil war because he's purging the Omrid dynasty. He's purging Ahab's family wherever they are. I mean, if they're in his kingdom, but he's not going south to do it. But they came into his kingdom and he killed them. He didn't give them any protection because they were from the kingdom of Judah. Killed them. So it's a pretty gruesome story. Also, still arguably not the most gruesome part of the story. Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. You'll decide.
He went on from there, and he met Jehonadab, son of Rechab, coming toward him. He greeted him and said to him, are you as wholehearted with me as I am with you? I am, Jehonadab replied. If so, said Jehu, give me your hand. He gave him his hand, and Jehu helped him into the chariot. Come with me, he said, and see my zeal for the Lord. And he was taken along in the chariot.
Yeah, so here's this guy, Jehonadab, and it says he's the son of Rechab. We don't know a lot about him from the text. Doesn't explain really who he is very well, other than, again, basically telling us who his father is. It's an important to kind of explain who he is or what he is, because he's actually not an Israelite. The Kenites, he's a member of this other group of people, this other ethnicity. The Kenites are Midianites. They are non-Israelite people. Now, again, they are related to us through Abraham, but they're like Bedouin. They're Arab people who are attached to us, from what we know, from the history and from the Bible itself and other places, we see that these people are worshipers of God. They become worshipers of God, but they're not Israelite, and they become essentially like almost kind of part of the community, but they maintain this other identity within the fold. There is a religious component to this, obviously, and we see that because he says, "My zeal for the Lord," right? And he says that to him in a way that almost, he wants to prove to him that he loves Adonai as well. He loves Adonai, and so that's, you're on the right side. So the Kenites, we don't really know what happens. We don't know who's a Kenite by the rabbinic period. One of the rabbis, Rabbi Halafta, is in the Talmud. It says he's a descendant of the Kenites. So it seems at some point they just kind of got mixed up with us and assimilated, and they became Jews. It's also possible that some of them, up through the early Christian times, were somewhat independent and maintained some kind of identity, tribal identity on their own. Some of the early Christians are called Rechabites. Don't know if that's literal, that they were literally descendants of Rechav and Yonadav, or maybe they are spiritually connected to them, as in the sense that they're non-Israelites who kind of behave like Israelites, and then they become Christians. But the Rechabites, like in kind of Christian midrash, become important. One of the things we know about the Rechabites traditionally is that they didn't drink alcohol. They were abstainers. They drank, interestingly, they're called water drinkers, because unlike most people who drank wine all the time, because it's what people drink and not water, right? They drank wine, and it was, low grade alcohol in some cases, maybe very little alcohol, but regardless, they didn't drink it. The reason why I say that that's important is because the Rechabites as a name become important in Christian tradition, because some of the temperance leagues were called, they would refer to them as Rechabites. So there were, I'll show you some of the this goes back to American history. Some of you know these things. Rosemary, do you know about the Rechabites?
No.
Okay, well, I'll just show you a little American. This will be a little American history that I'll share. So this is, for example, one of the temperance leagues from the American history. This is the Independent Order of Rechabites, temperance-friendly society. So people would kind of use the Rechabites as a kind of a modern day, for people that were involved in temperance leagues. And again, temperance was also, it wasn't just America. I don't want to say that, England and Australia, New Zealand had their, here's one right here, the Independent Order of Rechabites. This is from New Zealand. Universal Abstainers Friendly Society, right? The Pioneer Order of the Temperance Fraternities, the Rechabites. So it's weird to think about because it's so different from our world today. But there was a time when temperance societies were political forces. They literally were. They decided in some cases elections in cities and even in states on that level based on who the temperance societies endorsed. Look, and it's not to say that there wasn't obviously people who got backed by temperance societies who actually really did drink, but there was a time 100, 120, 130 years ago when one of the biggest, if not the biggest social issues after slavery was positions on alcohol. And as much as we talk about the social issues today that tear us apart, abortion and gun control and those kinds of issues that we talk about today. They had some real big issues back in America and in other parts of English, I would say, societies that were influenced by England. These were big issues, and not that, I mean, abortion, gun control are issues that affect us today in a big way. But alcohol is almost, we don't even think about it today because it's just part of our daily society, and people, they don't debate over whether alcohol should be legal or whether it should be allowed to be drunk on certain days and things like that. But I mean, if you think about it, alcohol is something it's a drink. We come in contact with it all the time. And for our history, at least, there was a period of time when that was you were confronted with this on a daily or at least weekly level of where you stood on this issue of temperance. So the Rechabites were, I would say, were reimagined or reabsorbed as kinds of heroes of the name was invoked to champion that. So if you ever hear about American history, about temperance societies and things like that, this was real. And I mean, people fought, in some cases got killed over the issue, but really politically it tore communities apart, and people had to make, they had to align themselves with one side of this or another. I mean, you see it in campaign ads throughout the late 1800s, early 1900s. You see these campaign posters where people are literally mocking that's the whole purpose of the ad, is to make fun of someone's position on alcohol. So that's where the Rechabites, this is the legacy of the Rechabites, which again, we don't even talk about anymore. But anyways, so this guy Yehonadav, which, by the way, he's a Kenite, he's a Rechabite, but you can see he has God's name in his name, right? So he is by the way, there's a lot of Yehus that we're going to read today, or Yehos. We're going to see a lot of them. So it's all God's name. It's the Yud He Vav He name, the Yeho part. You'll see God's name in a lot of names today. It'll get confusing how many Yehus we have. But this guy is not an Israelite. He's not from our tribes, but he's still, as you can see, a worshiper of God. All right. So let's see what he does.
Arriving in Samaria, Jehu struck down all the survivors of the house of Ahab in Samaria until he wiped it out, fulfilling the word that the Lord had spoken to Elijah. Jehu assembled all the people and said to them, Ahab served Baal little, Jehu shall serve him much.
Wow. So Jehu comes into Samaria, and he purges, obviously, all the people who were serving and part of Ahab's inner circle in Samaria, in the capital, which must have been even more people than he killed in Jezreel. I mean, Samaria is the capital, so he kills a lot of people. We don't even know how many people he kills in the capital. And now he does something really interesting. Now he turns his attention to God, to religious issues. And whoa, he just said, this guy was just made king, and he comes to the people and he says, Ahab served Baal a little bit. He had his hand in both places. I'm going to serve Baal a lot. Oh my gosh. This seems like Ahab was only a little of a Baal follower. Jehu's even worse. Jehu, what kind of guy is this guy going to be? Oh, wait, watch Jehu. Watch this guy.
Therefore, summon to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshipers and all his priests. Let no one fail to come, for I am going to hold a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever fails to come shall forfeit his life. Jehu was acting with guile in order to exterminate the worshipers of Baal.
So there we go. Now we know, as the readers, that this is a trick. That Jehu is really not. He's not in favor of Baal. He was tricking the people. He was like, you don't know me, but I happen to love Baal, and I'm going to bring all you guys out. We're going to put you back in power and make sure that, Baal is the main god that we're worshiping here. And I like to compare it to the lottery, announcements that they used to run, that the sheriff's departments used to run to get people to show who were delinquent in their child support payments and things like that. They would do these giveaways. They would send these people, you've won a boat, and they would, these people would show up and they'd arrest all these people who were delinquent. And that's what he just did. He's pulling this off. So let's see what he said. So he actually threatens the people. He said, if you don't come, you're going to die. So that might have been actually, if I had been a follower of Baal, I might have said, wait a second, this seems a little too good to be true. This guy seems a little too into Baal for me. But they didn't, they seem to have come out. So here's what happens.
Jehu gave orders to convoke a solemn assembly for Baal, and one was proclaimed. Jehu sent word throughout Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came. Not a single one remained behind. They came into the temple of Baal, and the temple of Baal was filled from end to end. He said to the man in charge of the wardrobe, bring out the vestments for all the worshippers of Baal. And he brought vestments out for them.
Seems good so far.
Then Jehu and Jehonadab, son of Rechab, came into the temple of Baal, and they said to the worshippers of Baal, search and make sure that there are no worshippers of the Lord among you, but only worshippers of Baal.
That's pretty good. Make sure they're all Baal people here.
So they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. But Jehu had stationed 80 of his men outside and had said, whoever permits the escape of a single one of the men I commit you to your charge shall forfeit life for life.
Yep. And so he puts his own soldiers out in front of the entrance to the temple. And he says, if any of these people get out, you're dead. So that's pretty scary. You don't want to mess that up. So we don't know how many people are inside exactly. But there's 80 armed guards outside. Well, let's read what happens.
When Jehu had finished presenting the burnt offering, he said to the guards and to the officers, come in and strike them down. Let no man get away. The guards and the officers struck them down with the sword and left them lying where they were. Then they proceeded to the interior of the temple of Baal. They brought out the pillars of the temple of Baal and burned them. They destroyed the pillar of Baal, and they tore down the temple of Baal and turned it into latrines, as is still the case.
Wow. So the temple of Baal is in Samaria, right? Assumedly, Ahab and Jezebel had this nice temple of Baal built in their capital, or Jezebel's god, right? And they come in there, the worshipers, on this day that Jehu says, we're going to get you guys all set up with the temple, and make sure they're all in their vestments, which, by the way, seems to also be a way to make sure that none of them are armed, because they're not there for, an average ordinary day. They're there to worship. They're there to pray. Now, look, the worshipers of Baal are not good people. I'm not going to say that they're good people, but this is a pretty horrific way of making sure that no one worships Baal anymore. I guess some people would say you got to do what you got to do, but this is pretty horrendous. They kill everybody. They tear down the pillars, which again, we would say is maybe the altars or sacred posts. And right here is maybe an altar. They destroyed it, and they tore it down, and they turned it into toilets. They turned it into toilets. So the Hebrew word for that is motzaot, which is another way of saying the place where you go. The place where you go, right? I need to go. We still say that, right? So that's what they did with the Temple of Baal. They turned it into a toilet, public toilet. So, yeah, that's a pretty good way of eradicating Baal worship. Jehu seems pretty efficient at doing this. Look, by virtue of what he just did, you'd think he would get approval from the editors or writers, whoever's putting down this story, right? This version of the story. He seems pretty good at destroying foreign gods, which again, as we've seen throughout the Bible, going all the way back to King Solomon, with regards to the kings, but I mean, obviously going back even further to the Bible, through the Bible to, Exodus, golden calf, through Numbers and Deuteronomy, all the times when Israelites have to be killed because they are worshiping other gods. These are Israelites that were murdered. I mean, these were Israelites that were killed. These were Israelite worshipers of Baal. And, look, you'd think that he would get approval for what he just did. Well, I won't ruin it. He does, but there's still a question of how good is this guy? Because as much as he does the right thing for getting rid of Baal, well, let's read.
Thus Jehu eradicated the Baal from Israel. However, Jehu did not turn away from the sinful objects by which Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had caused Israel to sin, namely the golden calves at Bethel and at Dan.
So he's really good at getting rid of Baal worship, but he's not good at getting rid of the golden calves, which they have a problem with. The writers, editors of this text, really, again, they'll give him credit for what he did with Baal, but because they're still worshiping at the golden calves, they are doing what's wrong. Now, was it the golden calves, or was it the fact they weren't going to Jerusalem, that they were still going to Dan and Bethel? Look, it doesn't really matter, because for the writers / editors of this text, it's all that matters, is people are still going to Dan and Bethel, to the calves, and not going to Jerusalem. That's it. That's all they care about. So at least they're worshiping God, but they're not worshiping God the right way. And they're still going to the golden calves. As we talked about on our Wednesday night class, when we read about the golden calf last week, it really is a problem because, or 2 weeks ago, it really is a problem because the golden calf does not seem to be seen as a idol by the northern Israelites. They don't worship the calf. But it being there is a problem. And the Israelites not worshiping Jerusalem is the problem. So it doesn't matter, that it wasn't really the idol. It doesn't matter, because it was getting people not going to Jerusalem, and it was taking away money and livelihood from the people who probably wrote and edited this in the first place. So that's really a problem. So seems like Jehu does good stuff, but he didn't do enough. He didn't do this part, which is get rid of the golden calves.
The Lord said to Jehu, because you have acted well and done what was pleasing to me, having carried out all that I desired upon the house of Ahab, 4 generations of your descendants shall occupy the throne of Israel.
Well, that's pretty good. 4 generations is a record for the northern kingdom. Getting 2 or 3 generations is about all they've been able to do since Jeroboam. But remember, Jeroboam was king about 975, 970 or so. In the last 120 years, they've had about a new king about on average, probably every 10 years. And Ahab and his father, it's not even, they ruined the statistical mean because they were king for 80 years of that. So most of the time there's been high turnover in the northern kingdom. So being a king for having your descendants on the throne for 4 is actually really, really good. That's a reward, big reward. But
Jehu was not careful to follow the teaching of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn away from the sins that Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit.
So again, it seems to be another dig at his northern kingdom having their own sites, their own cultic sites. So, he was not following the Torah according to these writers. Okay, so
in those days, the Lord began to reduce Israel, and Hazael harassed them throughout the territory of Israel, east of the Jordan, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the Manassites from Aroer by the Wadi Arnon up to Gilead and Bashan.
So what the text is just telling us now is that the Israelites were losing their territory. They were losing their territory on the other side of the Jordan River. So when we look at what we're talking about here, maybe I'll share this one instead. Let's show this one instead. Sorry. We'll show the tribes map. So what was read, the tribe of Manasseh, the Gadites, and the Reubenites are all here on the east side, right? They're all east of the Jordan. Here's the Jordan. Here's these tribes. And what the text is saying is that here Aram, King Hazael, he is invading and messing with these guys here, which makes sense because this is his kingdom, right? So the fact that he's making incursions into these areas, that makes sense. Those are the areas that he'd most likely, those are the ones that border his kingdom. So he's making it hard for the tribes. And this is 2.5 tribes, right? Because Manasseh's on both sides. And then you have Gad and Reuben. So it's 2.5 tribes that are on this side of the Jordan. So, this is not making life easy for Jehu. Which again, the writer of this seems to be saying it's because of this stuff. Because of this stuff, you get this stuff.
The other events of Jehu's reign and all his actions and all his exploits are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. Jehu slept with his fathers, and he was buried in Samaria. He was succeeded as king by his son Jehoahaz. Jehu reigned over Israel for 28 years in Samaria.
That's a long time. 30 years almost. He seems to have had, stability during his time. His son, Jehoahaz, becomes king. So he has that Jehu also there. Essentially, his name means I have a portion with Adonai, with the Lord, with God, with the Lord. And there's a stable transition of power from father to son. It really doesn't say much about his reign. It says it's in the annals of the kings of Israel. Again, this book we don't have. Again, the book of Chronicles might also have been using this book, the Divrei HaYamim, for them. What's interesting is the word Divrei HaYamim, what we translate as Chronicles, is actually not this book. So we have a book called Divrei HaYamim, Chronicles, which is a different version of it, a later version, if you will, of these books. It's definitely different than the Book of Kings, because our Book of Kings has less about the rule of these kings, less about it's focused more on the religious aspects of this, more about the prophets. I mean, we read almost 10 chapters where the focus of this was not on the kings, but on Elijah and Elisha. That's not what happens in the books of Chronicles. The books of Chronicles really are much more of these kinds of annals, these chronicles. The reason they don't call it the Chronicles is they don't want to confuse people. But this word, Divrei HaYamim, is the same words. It's the same title of the book of Chronicles in Hebrew. So Divrei HaYamim literally mean the book, the things of days, or the things of that happened over days. It's kind of like what a chronicle is. Chronos is time. It's like, the book of days, if you will. I think people have used that kind of phrasing for those kinds of things. But Devarim means things or words. And that's what this book that they refer to occasionally is about. The annals of kings of Israel, or the annals of the kings of Judah. So he dies and he's buried in Samaria. Seems like things have gone pretty smooth, right? So we now are going to go back south. We're going to go to the to the kingdom of Judah. Sorry. I do not mean the tribe of Judah. I mean very much the kingdom of Judah. And now we're going to read in this next part of our story today what happens in the kingdom of Judah during this time. And again, we're talking about 845, 850 onwards. What's going on in the kingdom of Judah. And so let me just bring up very quickly our map of our kings, our king lists, because I know that this is a lot of information for people to take up. And again, you might have thought that Jewish history was a lot easier to remember than this, but it pretty much is, because we don't have a lot of years of kings to deal with, like some kingdoms do, and a lot of it, of course, is lost to history, so we don't know. So again, we're right in this period right here. We have Jehu. Again, the way the Bible kind of looks at it is he starts off good and winds up evil. I don't really, I wouldn't say he's ever evil, but I'm more partial to people who don't worship in Jerusalem. Jehu becomes king the same time that Ahaziah becomes king. Jehoram is again, confusingly, he's married to Athaliah, and then his son is Ahaziah. But Ahaziah, you can see, is king for literally a minute. Jehu kills him. So Ahab has two sons, Ahaziah and Joram. They are not very good. They're, as you can see, listed as evil the whole time. It's hard to know. Ahaziah is not king for very long, and Joram seems like he's to some extent a product of his mother Jezebel. But again, what's important is that this woman Athaliah is his sister and his sister. So Athaliah is married to Ahaziah here, different Ahaziah. Again, we said there's a lot of names that are similar between them. Joram. But this is the time we're in right now. We're in this period right here. So we have this this period. So this guy was killed while he was visiting his uncle. This is his uncle, right? Because Yoram is married to Yoram's sister is Atalia. That's Yoram's sister, who is Ahaziah's mom. So Ahaziah was up here visiting his uncle when Jehu killed both of them. Atalia becomes queen. She makes herself queen. And that's what we're going to read about today. Any questions, comments, anybody confused yet? You might be confused in a moment. Hopefully I gave you the background that'll help you understand what we're about to read. Because what we're about to read is perhaps the most disgusting scene in the entire Bible. Let's read it.
When Atalia, the mother of Ahaziah, learned that her son was dead, she promptly killed off all who were of royal stock.
Now, it doesn't exactly say what that means, but it seems to mean that she killed off everyone in her family. Meaning her own sons, her own grandchildren, because she's a grandmother by this time, because Ahaziah, her son, was already king. Right? He was king. Her husband, the other Yoram, the Judah king Yoram, is their grandparents. So she killed her own grandchildren. She killed anybody who could have been a threat to her becoming queen, which meant that she killed her own family. So what kind of woman slaughters her own family?
Medea in Greek mythology.
Yep. Well, she definitely seems to have a single-minded purpose to be queen. Because again, you're kind of asking yourself, well, who's going to be queen after her? If she's a grandmother, and we would assume beyond childbearing years, what's she doing? Who's going to reign after her? She literally seems to be burning the house down around her of King David's family. These are the descendants of King David. I mean, this is 100 and something years after King David, but in King Solomon, but these are descendants through her, or some of them through her, of King David. And she goes on a purge to kill them, but she's literally destroying the future of the kingdom. I can make some political comments about people not really caring about what happens in the future for their people, but this is somebody who literally doesn't care about anything other than being in power for herself, for the moment, for however long she's going to live. I mean, you saw what we're talking about here. This is literally here she is. I mean, this is 6 years that she ends up living, but this chart is a little deceptive because Ahaziah is king for a year, so he doesn't get this much time. I mean, he's only got that much time so they can put his name in there. But her son isn't really king for very long. And again, here's Rehoboam, Abiah, who's only king for 2 years. He's not king for very long. Asa, who's king for a really long time. He's actually, we don't know much about him, but he seems like a good guy. He's a good king. Jehoshaphat, his son, we read a little bit about him. He's kind of a good king. And then things start to go wrong right about here. When King Jehoram, Jehoshaphat's son, becomes king. And we know that that's probably because he was married to Atalia. So Atalia is Yoram's wife. Ahaziah is their son, who gets killed right away. And now we're going to read about the grandson in a moment, not ruining it, but I want to, again, just get this all into your head. She kills everybody else. Well, wait, there's a story here.
But Yehoshua, daughter of King Joram and sister of Ahaziah, secretly took Ahaziah's son Joash away from among the princes who were being slain and put him and his nurse in a bedroom. And they kept him hidden from Athaliah so that he was not put to death. He stayed with her for 6 years, hidden in the house of the Lord, while Athaliah reigned over the land.
That's nuts. So they save one kid. By the way, I don't know. This is how, I can't get the, when I think about this, I just see,
Anastasia.
What?
Anastasia.
No, you're much classier than I am.
Oh.
I see Anakin Skywalker coming in to kill all the baby Jedis, all the younglings. That's
right. I thought of that too, but before.
No, this is a horrible scene of little kids being murdered because they happen to be part of the royal bloodline, and one of them gets saved. Now what's interesting is
there's always one that gets away. That's the trope.
But
there's all sorts of stories like this.
Oh yeah. No, this is the story. This is a hero story, right? This is the heroes. I mean, this is what Moses was, right? Moses was the child that wasn't killed.
One that got away.
Zeus in the Greek mythology is this one son that didn't get swallowed by his father. There's always these stories of people who survived a purge or miraculously, were the ones that survived to become a hero. So this is definitely one of those stories. And again, he's saved from his own grandmother. So his grandmother was going to kill him. And this woman, a hero, she's a hero, Yehoshua. And I said, everyone's got a Yeho before their name. But what's interesting, of course, is that isn't this her daughter? And it might not have been her daughter, because Yehoshua seems to have been maybe a daughter of King Joram, maybe through a different mother. But Ahaziah is 100% Athaliah's son, which makes Joash 100% her grandson. There's no question. She tried to kill her grandson. Her grandson got away, was saved, didn't get away. He was rescued. He was saved. And he was kept hidden in the temple, or at least in the precincts of the temple. Let's just see what this says here. Yeah, no. And right here, it adds a very important piece of information, which we know from the book of Chronicles, that Yehoshua was married to the high priest Jehoiada. Now, Jehoiada is a priest, right? He's one of the Kohanim. But it shows that the Kohanim were sometimes married to the royal family. All of this is really important because for the next 100 or so years, the connections to these people are going to determine the history of the Jewish people, definitely the kingdom of Judah. Look, right now, this woman saved the dynasty. But she also, as you can see, because she's married to a priest, not just a priest, the high priest, what's important here is that the priests are getting in with the royal family really well right now, because they're the ones that are keeping this kid alive. Joash is being literally kept alive by the priests. You can imagine what that would mean for him later on, right? The fact that he's raised by priests means he owes his life to the priests, right? You would assume that he's going to take very good care of the priests later on. That's a good guess. It's partially right and partially wrong, because he has no issue later on dealing with people who are not loyal to him in his mind. But look, he's a kid at this point. He's 7 years old while his grandmother is reigning over the land. So I said there's a lot of parallels to King Tut, because one of the things we know about King Tut is that King Tut's father, King Akhenaten, had led a revolt against the priesthood to some extent and had gotten people away from worshiping the gods of Egypt, worshiping the sun god. Well, King Tut is raised by the priests, and when Akhenaten dies, King Tut is reestablished by the priests, and he brings back all the good old-fashioned Egyptian priest worship, god worship that his father had gotten rid of. That's not quite what happens here exactly, but it's similar enough so that you can understand that priests could play a big role in the politics of things, and in this case, maybe no more so than this scene right here, which is the story of Joash, who is literally raised by priests. He's a king, he's a descendant of King David, but he's raised by priests. And he's being kept alive by, and he's living in hiding. I mean, literally like a Anne Frank type situation where he can't come out of the building. He can't come out because his grandmother will kill him. There's a famous play about Talia that was written by, it's interesting because you'd think that this character would be talked about in legend, and Queen Atalia would at least be picked up by other people as a model of, scary. I mean, even a scary story. But Jean Racine, the French playwright, wrote a play about Atali, and it was very popular, or went through periods of popularity in France, and the name Atali became somewhat of a name in France because of the play. There are people who think it's one of the best plays that he wrote, if not the best play he wrote, and so it's never been very popular. Atalia she's not even discussed in negative terms by the rabbis, because it's just such a weird story, and it's like so beyond what should happen that there's almost not even a lesson here for them. It's almost like they just put it away. They put it out of their minds that this happened. That she's wrong for so many reasons, not least of which she's Jezebel's daughter, not least of which she's a murderous, literally bent on nothing other than power. But she's almost not even talked about as the example of wickedness. She's just not talked about. So a lot of people don't even know she exists. I mean, if you talk about the kings of Israel, people don't even mention her. She's the only queen of Israel. She's the only woman that ever reigned as queen without a king. She was there without a son.
But she's painted as, because men wrote the story. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's the only woman mentioned as ruling, but she's described so horribly and attributed to such a horrible action because she's a she.
Maybe, but I'll tell you what's really interesting about it. The rabbis don't even get into it. Like, for them, it's not even an issue that she shouldn't have been queen. She's not even discussed. I mean, it's like she's almost completely out of the midrash or out of the rabbinic mind. It's almost like we won't even acknowledge that she existed. I mean, I never knew anything about Queen Atalia because she's not in any of the traditional sources until I got in, really into the Book of Kings, is like, what we're going to read here. And again, there are people who say, I was going to get to this later, there are people who say that this is all made up, that the story, that all of the books of Kings are kind of made up until, like, we don't have historical evidence for these people. I mean, there's there's people who say that. There are people who say that King David cannot be, we can't substantiate that there ever was a King David or King Solomon. And even up to this point, I'm not saying that they're the majority of biblical scholars, but I mean, to me, this 100% happened, because who would invent this, and what's the purpose of inventing this story? And to that
paint
extent,
women rulers as bad.
and that's why the story, I believe, happened, because nobody would have invented this story of a woman who did these things. And I think that there were eyewitnesses to it, and I think that people were upset in the text. They were upset with her, and you're right, because the men wrote the story. But look, she's also a worshiper, we assume, again, a follower of Baal. She's a follower of she does the kinds of things that her mother does. And like, it all fits in. I mean, look, she killed everybody in her family. There's no question that that this woman is just beyond the pale. But like, they don't even talk about her in those ways. I mean, they talk about in the Bible some of the horrible characters in the Bible, Balaam. They talk about,
Yeah, but her story is so bad, it needs no embellishment. Women rulers are bad. Look what Jezebel did. Look what this woman, what Atalia did. They're bad. We don't need to even discuss it anymore.
I think the fact that there was a woman on the throne of King David makes people like, they don't even want to comprehend it. They don't even want to discuss it. And so they don't, but it happened. I mean, it happened. And it happened, by the way, in Egypt too. There's Queen Hatshepsut, which people have written about now because they completely eradicated her out of Egyptian history. They actually carved her face out of the walls that she was on in Egypt. I mean, she was a real person, and we were able to recover her history from the hieroglyphics. But there was a queen of Egypt that did some similar stuff to this woman. And I mean, I think she's a fascinating character. I think I would like to see people delve into her character. I'd like to see people tell her story, because I mean, as much as she's an evil person based on the things that she does to children, murdering her own family, there's a compelling story there. There's a story of a woman who reigns for 6 years as on the throne of King David. You say what you will about it. It's a crazy story. And most Jews do not know it exists. Most religious Jews don't really know that she existed. They don't talk about her in the yeshivas. I mean, they don't study her, because there's not even any, like I said, there's not even any midrash about her. There's not even like, well, we know her from this way. There's nothing about her. So I do think it's a compelling story. And again, she's not going to last for much longer, but let's read. At least there's not much in the text, because here's what happens.
In the 7th year, Jehoiada sent for the chiefs of the hundreds of the Karites and of the guards, and had them come to him in the house of the Lord. He made a pact with them, exacting an oath from them in the house of the Lord, and he showed them the king's son. Now,
by the way, from this text right here, we are introduced. It doesn't say anything here about Jehoiada, and right here we hear Jehoiada. Doesn't say anywhere here. It said in Chronicles that he was the priest, the high priest. It doesn't say that here, and it says that he sent for the chiefs of the Karites, and we don't know what that really is. It says the Kari. We think it's actually kind of there's a letter missing. The Kratim are the guards, right? Those are I told you, think about Praetorian guards. These are people that go back to King David's time as a professional army that he used, that were not from his people, that were not Israelite. We believe that Kerethites were actually Kratim, were actually Philistines that were put into the guard of Israel as kind of tough guys that were would be loyal only to the king. Basically, again, guards that were who could be trusted in the inner circle. The Turks had janissaries that were also non-Turkish people that they used, that they would bring in and raise from childhood to be their kind of armed guards in the palace. these Kerethites seem to be like that, and Jehoiada sends for these guys because he needs them to do what he's about to do, right? So he shows them that there's actually a member of the royal family that survived. So he shows them this young kid, Yoash. He shows them to him, and he says,
he instructed them, "This is what you must do. 1/3 of those who are on duty for the week shall maintain guard over the royal palace. Another third shall be stationed at the sewer gate, and the other third shall be at the gate behind the guards. You shall keep guard over the house on every side."
so again, the sewer gate is a little different in the book of Chronicles. It says the foundation gate. We're not exactly sure, where these are around the palace, but they are in Jerusalem's royal precinct, if you will, kind of like maybe the Forbidden City in Beijing or some of these royal areas that are not just one building, but a few different buildings, and then there's gates into the royal precinct. And he basically tells them, "You guys shut down the gates. You guys shut down the gates. You guys go to these different gates, and
The 2 divisions of yours who are off duty this week shall keep guard over the house of the Lord for the protection of the king."
So you guys are not going off duty this week. So normally they would run in shifts. And so there's 2 divisions that would normally have been off duty. So it shows you that they rotated, people, which is what they do with these kinds of guards. But remember, these are not, in the old days, and I'm talking about up until a couple hundred years ago, there were no professional armies. Your armies were made up of militias of citizens that you'd either pay or press into service to be your soldiers. When you had professional soldiers, the Romans did, there were other kingdoms that did it on a big scale. But if you did, you still had to have rotations. You had to have people that would be on duty, and then they would go off duty, because they were not like soldiers that fought in battle all the time, because those people were not called up unless they were going off to battle. So these are professional soldiers, mercenaries, if you will. These are people who are paid to fight, and that's all they do. And he says, this week, these guys are not going off. The guys that you would normally send away, you're not sending them away. So they literally now have more guards than they would normally have in the royal area. So as the people who are stationed there that day, they're going to be at the gates, and then the people who are going to go home, they're going to stay and they're going to fight with us because they're going to protect the king. So you guys, you'll get your vacation later, but you're not going on vacation right now.
"You shall surround the king on every side, every man with his weapons at the ready, and whoever breaks through the ranks shall be killed. Stay close to the king in his comings and goings." The chiefs of hundreds did just as Jehoiada ordered. Each took his men, those who were on duty that week and those who were off duty that week, and they presented themselves to Jehoiada the priest.
Yeah. So again, Jehoiada means the one who knows God, or knowing God, right? Jehoiada. He's they're answering to him. They're not answering to the royal family. Well, they are through him, through Joash, this kid, but it shows you that this priest is leading the coup. I mean, it's very clear. There's not a question who's the mastermind of this. There's not a question. It's a priest that leads this coup.
The priest gave the chiefs of hundreds King David's spears and quivers that were kept in the house of the Lord. The guards, each with his weapons at the ready, stationed themselves from the south end of the house to the north end of the house, at the altar and the house, to guard the king on every side.
So now this is why I think the story 100% happened, because they actually answered a question, which is, well, where did they get the weapons? Because if the guys normally are rotating with the weapons, and they're leaving their spears and their shields back at the base, the guys who should be off duty this week wouldn't have weapons. So it says that the priest actually, Yehoiada, gave them the stuff that was in the temple. These were things in the temple precinct, maybe not inside the Beit HaMikdash, but in the area. There were shields. Well, here it says spears, but in Chronicles it actually says spears and shields. He gives them these bows and all the weapons that they need. There were weapons that were there from King David's time, which again doesn't mean that they're necessarily in the best condition, but it doesn't matter if the shield is 100 years old, it's still going to work. The metal at the end of a spear is still going to work after 100 years. But the question of where they got the weapons from, the Bible actually tells us this information, which I think is like, this is not mythical. This is somebody who actually reported on it, I believe. And again, you'll see, I'm not just saying that, because there actually is proof that some of this happened from an archaeological source that we can actually date. This is telling us, we might not get to it today, but we'll get to it, if not today, then next week. This is telling us where even the weapons came from. They came from inside the temple precinct. It came from inside the house. So that's a detail that I think somebody had to report on. I could be wrong, but it seems to me to be too much of a detail here. So here's what happens.
Jehoiada then brought out the king's son and placed upon him the crown and the insignia. They anointed him and proclaimed him king. They clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king!" When Atalia heard the shouting of the guards and the people, she came out to the people in the house of the Lord.
So everybody got what happens right here. They put him on the throne. They give him, you can see the translation here. It says the meaning of the Hebrew uncertain, but it's some type of there's some type of priestly kingly ornament that the guy holds, which shows that he's king, like a scepter kind of thing. But he put the crown on him, and they put a scepter in his hands. And what's interesting is it says, and they anointed him. Vayim shachu. They put oil on his head, which they only do when they're making a new king, a new line. It didn't say all the other kings were anointed. It says that David is anointed. It says that Solomon is anointed. And you can make the case that they had to anoint Solomon to show that this is a lineage that's continuing from King David. I mean, obviously they anointed Saul too. But putting oil on the head to actually make him the Moshiach, to make him the anointed one, they do this for him. Because Jehoash is literally re-establishing the kingship after his grandmother. And so they said, that's what it says, Yehi Chamelech, long live the king, long live the king. And there's coronation. And the queen hears it. She hears it. And she comes out to the people. She hears what's happening. And here's her reaction.
She looked about and saw the king standing by the pillar, as was the custom, the chiefs with their trumpets beside the king, and all the people of the land rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Atalia rent her garments and cried out, "Treason, treason!"
Wow. So it's her grandson on the throne, and they've anointed him and coronated, and literally using trumpets, right? And this is quite a scene. But she walks out and is surprised to see. And you can see what she does. She tears her clothes. She does Kriya. She rips her clothes like somebody died. Well, she knows what's going to happen. But she sees that this is the end. And that scene is just a dramatic, it's a brilliant scene to imagine. Like that moment that she comes out and sees everyone celebrating a king on the throne. And she thought this would never happen. She thought she eliminated every possible rival. She thought she killed all the line. She killed perhaps hundreds of babies and kids and anybody who could claim, adults, anybody who could claim legitimacy through King David. And here's the king on the throne. So yeah, you need to get, Meryl Streep or Glenn Close to play this role, because it's got to be someone who can show the full range of emotion, of shock, of realization of now impending doom, her own death, which she can see right in front of her. She knows what's going to happen. So it's an amazing scene to think, transpiring 830, whatever, 837 BCE. This is taking place in Jerusalem. A story that nobody talks about.
Then the priest Jehoiada gave the command to the army officers, the chiefs of hundreds, and said to them, "Take her out between the ranks, and if anyone follows her, put him to the sword." For the priest thought, "Let her not be put to death in the house of the Lord." They cleared a passageway for her, and she entered the royal palace through the horses' entrance. There she was put to death.
Wow. So you can imagine that scene too. Her being escorted out of the palace, out of the holy precinct. And they kill her out in the passageway where they take the horses in when they go into the palace. That's where they kill her. That's where Jezebel and Ahab's daughter was killed. A similar end to the rest of the family. So don't kill her inside the holy city of holy parts of Jerusalem. Take her out back in the back of the place and kill her there. So that scene of her being led out through the people, right? They cleared a passageway for her. People moved aside as she's escorted out. Wow. Wow.
And Jehoiada solemnized the covenant between the Lord on the one hand and the king and the people on the other, as well as between the king and the people, that they should be the people of the Lord.
So there you go. The priest creates a brit, a covenant between the people and the king. And this is an agreement. And the agreement is they should all be people of Adonai.
Thereupon, all the people of the land went to the temple of Baal. They tore it down and smashed its altars and images to bits. And they slew Matan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Jehoiada, the priest, then placed guards over the house of the Lord.
Wow. So there's a Baal destruction that goes on in the southern kingdom too. So this is a really good time for people who are worshiping God and not Baal. There's been a purge of Baal worshipers in the northern kingdom, in Samaria, and also now in the south, in Judah, in Jerusalem, in the capital. So Baal worship has been purged. It's been gotten rid of. It's not been completely gotten rid of, but this is a good time for the priests of God. This is a good time for people getting back to God. Which is why this King Joash is considered to be a good king, at least to start with. He's doing all the right things. He's also 7 years old. He doesn't have a lot of power at 7 years old, I promise you. He might have been a very smart, precocious, competent 7-year-old, but he's still a 7-year-old. There is no question who is calling the shots, and it's this guy right here. So here you see right here, he's called the priest, right? It says it now. I mean, it's calling him the priest. They didn't call him the priest originally, but now they're calling him the priest. And to some extent, it's because he's the priest and Joash is the king. But there's a very close. He has close power or reign. He has reigns on the power. So here's what he does. Here's what Yehoiada does now that he's in power, or now that his regent is in power.
He took the chiefs of hundreds, the Karaites, the guards, and all the people of the land, and they escorted the king from the house of the Lord into the royal palace by the gate of the guards, and he ascended the royal throne. All the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet. As for Athaliah, she had been put to the sword in the royal palace.
Yeah. So that is the way the guy becomes king. And so he goes into the royal palace. So, he doesn't go into the royal palace until she's gone, she's dead, but she is, she's dead and long live the king. And it says all the people of the land rejoiced. I mean, it says, Vayismach kol ha'am. And the city was quiet. So it seems like a happy ending. It's not the ending to the story. It's not the ending to King Joash, but it is the end to Queen Athaliah. That's all we know about her, folks. I'm telling you, go look her up. We know nothing about this woman. Imagine her. I mean, imagine Queen Athaliah. I mean, she also has God's name in her name. It's at the end. Yahu's at the end of it, but go figure it out. I mean, I don't know. She is. She's essentially killed in this coup led by a priest. And her grandson's now in power. So let us read what happens with this 7-year-old king.
Jehoash was 7 years old when he became king. Jehoash began his reign in the 7th year of Jehu, and he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother's name was Ziviah of Beersheba.
Yeah, so we know that his mother, his father is Ahaziah. His mother's name is Tzvia in Hebrew.
Ziviah.
Which is a beautiful name and actually became a pretty popular Hebrew name pretty much after Israel's establishment. Tzvia became I had a lot of Hebrew teachers named Tzvia. Not a lot, but I had a few.
Is that the same name as Ziva, the NCIS character?
I think so. I think it is. I think it's based on that. Svia means literally a Svi is a deer.
Hmm.
And, it's, I think it's, I think, well, we don't know much about her other than she's Joash's mom, but, we, she seems like, seems like a good person, but anyways, it became a more popular Hebrew name. Again, as Israelis started turning back and reading about other parts of the Bible that we hadn't studied as much, people started reclaiming these names. They did not quit. Nobody reclaimed the name Atal Yahu. People didn't want to be named Atal Yahu, but some of these names became some of these names actually, and interestingly, some of the names of people that were not necessarily so great, if they had a name that people liked and it had a good meaning, they did keep some of those names. Like the name Nadav. Nadav is not a good person in the Bible, but Nadav became a more popular Hebrew name. So people started turning to the Bible for traditional Hebrew names, if you will, and they started taking names that were not necessarily heroes of the Bible, not necessarily patriarchs or matriarchs. But yeah, we don't know a lot about her. And Achav is not a very popular name in Israel. I do know some people that are named Achav. It's almost like a defiantly Hebrew name, but it's not a name that people use a lot. So if you want to continue. This is chapter 12, and this is where we're going to finish today.
Jehoash was 7 years old when he became king. Jehoash began his reign in the 7th year of Jehu, and he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother's name was Svia of Beersheba. All his days, Jehoash did what was pleasing to the Lord, as the priest Jehoiada instructed him.
So it seems as there that he did good. His mother was from the south, was from Beersheba, which is a southern part of the kingdom of Judah, probably more of kind of like real Judah, if you will, from the heartland of Judah. It says he did good stuff, which is interesting. As the priest, you could say he did what was pleasing to the Lord, as Jehoiada instructed him. While Jehoiada is there, he seems to do what's pleasing to God. Let's keep that in mind. So he seems to be doing what's pleasing. Seems to be good. Endorsement, a ringing endorsement.
The shrines, however, were not removed. The people continued to sacrifice and offer at the shrines.
So the one knock on the guy is that he doesn't stop people from worshiping in their own backyards. That is an issue to the priests. Why? Because it means they're not getting their money. They're not getting their sacrifices. So he was good at making sure people only worship God. He wasn't great at making sure that they only worship God where they're supposed to worship God, Jerusalem. Now, I will tell you, this is a major issue because you saw that that's an issue that they have with Jehu in the northern kingdom. They have an issue with Joash not having people worship in the right place in the south. And now here's a very interesting part of the story that we're going to read right now, which is Joash's. And again, sometimes he's listed as Jehoash, and sometimes he's listed as just as Joash without the hey. It's the same guy. There's just a shorter, and then there's a longer way of writing his name out with a hey or without a hey, but it's the same guy, Joash. So here's what he's going to do. And I love this story because the story, I think, also gives us an indication you don't make up this story we're about to read. All right.
Joash said to the priests, all the money, current money, brought into the house of the Lord as sacred donations, any money a man may pay as the money equivalent of persons, or any other money that a man may be minded to bring to the house of the Lord, let the priests receive it, each from his benefactor. They, in turn, shall make repairs on the house wherever damage may be found.
Mhm. So he basically says to the people, specifically to the priest, tell
We're
the
going to
people,
have a building fund.
we're having a building fund. Exactly. It's time to fix this place up. It's 150 years old. So it's time to make sure that we're building, that the building's in good shape. We have these discussions all the time at the temple. We have one going on right now, which is how much are we spending on the building to make sure that we're not deferring maintenance. And so for those, by the way, I will just say that Philip has been working very hard on this. We just had the lights, the street lights. Edison just came out and that wasn't something we had to pay for, but something we had to stay on. They came out and they fixed both of the lights, the street lights that are in the corners. They were on last Friday night. If people were here, it does make a nice difference to have those lights on. But we're also in the process. There's about to be some other stuff being done. I guess it has to be formally voted on, but it appears that our temple, which is like many buildings, had termites. We're about to do a termite eradication in our place. We're also getting the air conditioning repaired and restored to its full potential. A bunch of stuff is happening over the course of the next few months. A lot of repairs on the doors, other pieces that cosmetically need to be done. And this is a big issue because for a synagogue our size or any size, there's always the question of what do you put into programming and what do you put into the facilities? You only have a certain amount of money. This was an issue in the temple 2,800 years ago. This is a big issue. It's what we're going to finish up with today.
But in the 23rd year of King Joash, it was found that the priests had not made the repairs on the house.
Oh,
They've been collecting the money and they didn't spend it on what they were supposed to. Yeah, it's a problem.
Definitely a problem. So King Joash summoned the priest Jehoiada and the other priests and said to them, why have you not kept the house in repair? Now do not accept money from your benefactors anymore, but have it donated for the repair of the house.
So he basically says you're cut off because you've been collecting this money. You were supposed to be repairing the place. You did not repair the place. Now, again, their argument would be, hey, I'm not arguing on behalf of what they did, but let me just, I guess, explain maybe their logic, which is we got to keep the place running, right? You want to keep the place looking nice, but these people have to get paid. We have to take care of the priests. Now you can make the argument, well, but he told you what to do. So you can see a little bit of tension between the king and the priests. And the king is the king. And the king basically says, you had this money, you didn't spend it on what you're supposed to. So from now on, the money goes towards the temple. Now, look, you can always make the argument, if there aren't priests that can take care of the temple, what difference does it make what the temple looks like? So that's again, I'm not saying I'm making the excuse for it, but that's the counter argument, which is, yeah, but we have programming we've got to take care of. So he's saying now, he told the priest, Jehoiada, it's going into the building now, from now on.
The priests agreed that they would neither accept money from the people nor make repairs on the house.
So they basically say we've been taken out of it. Okay, we understand, which means that essentially the money that will be collected will go directly to the repair. It's not passing through the priests anymore. That's essentially what happened. I mean, that for the sake of like what really just happened, they basically said, you're not getting the money anymore. You're not in charge of it. You won't do it. And you're not collecting the money from it.
And the priest Jehoiada took a chest and bored a hole in its lid. He placed it at the right side of the altar as one entered the house of the Lord, and the priestly guards of the threshold deposited there all the money that was brought into the house of the Lord. Whenever they saw that there was much money in the chest, the royal scribe and the high priest would come up and put the money accumulated in the house of the Lord into bags, and they would count it. Then they would deliver the money that was weighed out to the overseers of the work who were in charge of the house of the Lord. These, in turn, used to pay the carpenters and the laborers who worked on the house of the Lord.
Yeah. One more.
And the masons and the stonecutters. They also paid for wood and for quarried stone with which to make the repairs on the house of the Lord, and for every other expenditure that had to be made in repairing the house.
So everybody got what just happened? The money's collected. It doesn't pass through their hands, because as soon as they got a lot of money, right, the royal scribe would come and count it. So there was a royal overseer, a member of the royal family or the royal entourage, that would count the stuff when it came in. So the people would come in when they came into the temple, they'd put the money there, but the priest wouldn't actually collect it. It would be collected in front of the royal scribe, who wrote it all down. And it was in a sealed box. So it was like a true charity box, in the sense that you didn't open it up every day. As soon as it got filled, then they'd open it up, put it in the bags, and then they would count it, and then they would pay them out. So it was not left to the priests anymore to do it. The money was essentially collected and then distributed out. So the priests had no way of taking any of that money themselves. So a way to cut them out of the ability to take it, right? They proved that they couldn't be left in charge of it. And so they were not given authority to do it. Okay, everybody makes sense? Makes sense, everybody? Yes. This is what happens when you prove that you can't be left with the bank account. You don't get to run the bank account anymore.
However, no silver bowls and no snuffers, basins, or trumpets, no vessels of gold or silver were made at the house of the Lord from the money brought into the house of the Lord. This was given only to the overseers of the work for the repair of the house of the Lord.
Right.
No check was kept on the men to whom the money was delivered to pay the workers, for they dealt honestly.
Well, that's a really good thing, which means that the priests are basically here now admitting that, they didn't take any of the money. It was given over. Everyone did it was done the way it should be done. The money was given over. And
Money brought as a guilt offering or as a sin offering was not deposited in the house of the Lord. It went to the priests.
yeah. And so the money that came in for the offerings, and here it, by the way, says that money was coming in for the guilt offerings. It tells us right here, again, when we read about guilt or sin offerings, that these were animals. Well, right here, it's telling us that already people are not bringing animals anymore. They're bringing money. They're bringing the cash equivalent. So the priests got to live off of that. Why? Because there was no way for them to offer up all those animals. If everybody who had to offer up an animal for a sin or for a guilt, something they had done wrong, if they had done that, they would have been animals. They couldn't have killed all those animals. So what they did is they allowed people to give a cash equivalent, and the priests lived off of that. That's what the priests got for their lives. That was their programming money, if you will. That was to keep the thing running.
So
Now,
if people were to stop sitting, the priests would starve.
yes, but
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah,
we need to delve a little deeper into if you go back up to for me at least, because this is it's detailed in some places, and it's like a what's the right word?
hey, you're missing something.
It's in 12:3, right? All his days did what was pleasing to the Lord as the priests instructed him. Yet he found out that they were stealing, right? So I need it fleshed out. If you can't trust them with the money, how do you trust them with the interpretation of what the Lord wanted? So it brings into question the whole thing.
Well, no, but what's interesting about it about this, which I find interesting, is that the priests, we know that the priests edited this. We know the priests were the ones who decided that this would go in. Look, you're
Oh,
right,
okay.
and I think kind of assuming that this is the sterilized, the sanitized version of what happened, because Yoash gave them a command, which is that I want this building fixed up, and they didn't do it. Now, again, my rationalization of that, my excuse for them was, what are you going to do? You're going to raise money for the building, and meanwhile, how are we going to pay the priests? Now, look, it could be that the priests had more than enough money and they want more money. I mean, it's very hard to tell people when they have access to money, you don't get to spend the money, because if they had nobody watching them, then they did what they did, which was they kept it. Look, I will tell you this. This is why when even, like I said, our own synagogue has these discussions of how we're spending the money. Look, I don't need to get into how I look at this, because I think it's a pretty serious issue, and it's one where I get both sides of it. But on the other hand, there's a difference between spending money on fixing up the building in order to keep it running smoothly, and then there's another issue of, well, is this a priority for us to spend money on the facade of a building where we're not taking care of what we need to. I mean, I think if you always have to balance those things, and I think if the takeaway from this is, and we're going to see that Yoash has at a certain point, when he was old enough, didn't trust the priests. There's no question about that. The number one, like I said, the priests, I already said this, the priests wrote this, the priests edited this, the priests decided that they were okay with this being there, which means this is probably a sanitized version of what happened. I agree with you. I think you're right. I think this is the less problematic version of this story, which the priests were okay with. And even there, you can read between the lines saying, hey, they couldn't be trusted with the money. So I get that. Look, you know what I was thinking about when I read this? Kind of finish with this idea today, because this is what we're finishing with. This is actually where we're ending right here. This story. A few years ago, and some of you know this because you've been there, Wilshire Boulevard Temple spent $70 million fixing up their site on Western in Wilshire in Koreatown. They spent $70 million to fix up their building. Now, look, they have enough money to keep their operations going, and they're doing fine. They didn't cut staff, and they didn't cut money from taking care of their rabbis and their teachers and everything else, their preschool, everything's functioning fine there. But they spent $70 million to fix up that location. Now, it was spearheaded by the rabbi of the congregation. He wanted it done. He didn't stand in its way. He encouraged it. Now, you can make the argument that it's always easier to raise money for buildings than it is for programming, because people get to see their name on the building. I get that. I understand that. $70 million, if you do the math, that's you could have, our synagogue could be sustained for 20 years on $1 million. So less than that. But anyways, the point is that $70 million was a lot of money to spend on a building, when you could make the argument it should be spent on Jewish life. It could send 10,000 Jewish kids to day school. I'm not joking. It's literally like 10,000 kids, but that was what at least part of the Jewish community, what one synagogue decided to spend money on. Their argument would be, look, this is the grand dame of LA synagogues. Let's spend $70 million on it, because we deserve to have a building that we can say, will be the beautiful building for the Jewish community for the next 100 years. And maybe people will move back to this area. Hasn't happened yet. There are more Jews living downtown than there were 20 years ago, but it's not because of Wilshire Boulevard, and it's not because of any other function that, some areas have been gentrified and they're trying to get people to move down to LA Arts District and everything else, but that's still too far away from Wilshire Boulevard Temple. I'm only going to tell you, it kind of boggles the mind, but at the same time, that was their priority. That was the way they decided to spend the money. The Jewish community is always kind of trying to figure out, how best to allocate resources. The point is that he told them what to do. He actually gave them instructions on what to do, and they didn't do it, which again gives you an idea that he was very much controlled by them, and he was very much respected the priests because he was raised by them, and he probably let them get away with this when he could have killed them for doing what they had done. But the priests also are being very clear to tell you that anything that they did for their own stuff was their own money, was money that had been allocated or was not from this pool of money that was being brought in from that point on. So from the time that Joash called them out and said, "You're not building this," for the rest of the time, then the building got done. The work had gotten done. So I don't know what to tell you other than, yeah, you're right. This is the version of it that the priests even wanted to have, but it basically says that, Joash stepped in and fixed it. I will tell you, and we didn't, we'll read it next week. He goes off the rails a little bit, Joash, as he continues on as king, because let's just say he makes some enemies. I'll leave it at that. By the way, you might have figured that out also back when you read about this. It says that he starts in the 7th year of Jehu. When he's 7, Jehu has been king since he murdered remember, Jehu did murder his father, right? His grandmother killed everybody else, but Jehu was the one who killed his father. But it says right here, he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. Now, you don't have to be super good at math to figure out that he's 47 years old when he dies. So either he got really sick or somebody made him really sick. Somebody, in this case, I will tell you that somebody made him die. So he obviously runs afoul of some people, which we're going to get to next week. But he seems like he's, at this point, he's doing the right thing. He's praying to the right God. He's taking care of the priests. He's trying to build a temple. He's doing everything that you'd think would be what a good king should do. One thing he didn't do, according to these guys, is he didn't stop people from worshiping in their backyard. He didn't make everyone go to Jerusalem, but he does lots of other good things. But yes, John, you're 100% right. This is definitely an example of something not being here. And what's not is that this is the sanitized version of this story. This is the story the priest wants you to know.
I sure wish there would have been some more on the whistleblower. I'm just saying, right? I mean, it's kind of over, I get it now, who wrote the story. They don't want to know about the CPA, the accountants that were dealing with the money. And finally, 18 years later, they said, hey, you know what? Whatever. I'm reading the book. I'd like it to be fleshed out a little bit more, but I'm not going to get that.
You're right in that we have to understand that this is obviously not the story that they want you to. That's not what they're going to focus on. But the fact that they even told this story, I do want to let's just say one thing. The fact that the priests even let the story be told is pretty amazing, because it shows us that the Jewish people, at least, are not afraid to tell the other side, the dark side, if you will, the bad stuff. And it's important because, you think that what people can do is just expunge that. Don't talk about it. And again, as we said, Atalia kind of gets expunged intentionally because the story's there, and then we still don't talk about it. I think that we really do ourselves a disservice by not reading these stories. And it's sad that a lot of Jews don't know the Book of Kings, because these stories, as you've seen them for chapters now, all the way back to King David and Samuel to some extent. The court history is not a pretty picture. It is literally a story where the good points, we actually don't really read much of the good points. The stuff that we get are the bad parts. And I think it's interesting that we were not afraid to tell this story. We shouldn't be afraid we should never be afraid to talk about the stuff that was bad, because we can learn from it. It's not maybe you could argue we focus on it too much, but you have to learn from it. You can't ignore it. You can't pretend like it didn't happen. And I think when people recognize that this is part of our history, we can be not only honest and learn from it, but we can also know, look, just between you and me, I've never done it. Most of the people you know have never done anything like these people do. I don't know if you know a lot of people that have murdered their grandchildren and stolen money from God, from the coffers of the people coming in to pray. I mean, this is pretty bad stuff. And again, I would challenge us to say even the worst stories we have today, and we have them, right? We have the Jeffrey Epsteins, we have the Madoffs, we have these stories, and they're bad. And I'm the first to tell you, I don't want to sweep them under the rug, but I also want to tell you they don't represent the majority of Jews. And when we see people, running around spouting anti-Semitic stuff, that we feel bad about it. We start to think, well, maybe are they right? I mean, are we really doing bad stuff? Or and we even start to second guess ourselves. But I think if we're honest about what we do wrong, and I think if we're also at the same time going to sit back and go, look, you can't get away with saying that because it's not true. I think I think we can be pretty healthy people by acknowledging our shortcomings, but at the same time saying, yeah, but Madoff represents a fraction of Jews that are involved in finance, that are honest and decent people who are working hard for their clients. And I feel bad. I talked with a very major finance guy, business manager for a lot of really major music artists. He's a really nice guy. I've known him on and off. I mean, I've seen him on and off for 25 years. I said to him 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, when the Kanye stuff was breaking, I said, I feel terrible for you because you're at the front lines of this. You've dealt with these artists. You've had to deal with probably even some of their anti-Semitism coming out in your discussions with them, because on one hand, they go, I got a Jew handling my money. And at the same time, they brag about that. And at the same time, they say this kind of stuff that's like, you're like, well, you actually believe this stuff. You want to believe this stuff. And yet, your anti-Semitism, you get it both. You can get both sides of it. You can use it as a positive for you to say, I got to get myself a Jew, which is what I've heard this said. It's not like, I'm not making this up. Look it up. People who go, I got to get myself a Jew, they're talking about a lawyer or an accountant. And then at the same time, turn around and go, well, the Jews control, all the money. They control all the, they're bleeding us dry. And I feel bad for people who've spent their lives trying to do their jobs, and they have to deal with that kind of, not just anti-Semitism, but literally attacking their character and who they are, just trying to do their job. I don't know. I mean, I thought about that with this too, which is, there's anti-Semitism, which affects all of us. And then there's stuff that happens to people who are literally, they're being discussed in a kind of a generalized way. But these are people who are, as I said, are kind of on the front lines of this. And, I feel really bad for them. I feel bad for the fact that, that people are wondering, are you one of those guys? Are you taking advantage of people? So I don't know. It's maybe a discussion that we'll have with some of them at another date, but I hope we're going to start putting this stuff to rest. I keep saying that, and then, something else happens. So I'm hoping that this week will be a first week in a month where we don't have to deal with somebody else popping up with anti-Semitism, but who knows? I for the last couple hours while we've been in class, I haven't been watching the news, so I don't know. Maybe my wish has already not been granted. So anyways, don't forget tomorrow night, we're going to be at the movie theater at the Lemleys for where the Jews are controlling the movies. The Lemley movie only in theaters with Greg Lemley from the family of the Lemleys, going back all the way to the Universal Pictures from the very early days. He's going to be there. You can see the movie, and then he's going to be there afterwards to take some questions and to tell you about how the movie, what the movie might have left off to get the whole story. So that's tomorrow night. It's at 7:30. And then next week, we'll see The Fablemans, about another one of those Jews that controls Hollywood, Steven Spielberg, his family story, and it told in a fictionalized way. But I'm looking forward to seeing The Fablemans with you on the 29th. So those are the two other times for us to get together, in addition to all the stuff that you saw that we're posting for Hanukkah. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Rosemary, for reading.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here this morning, and we'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Happy
Rabbi.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.